This is a Geek Leader. Welcome to episode 156 of a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's episode is brought to you by Splashtop, a remote access solution. Try Splashtop to remote into your work computer from home, especially if your computer requires heavy CPU processing or terabytes of storage that you cannot replicate at home. Splashtop announces the capability to stream ultra high resolution quality during remote sessions, as if you were sitting there right in front of your computer at your high-end workstation. All types of professionals are now using Splashtop. Fast 4K streaming to access high-performance workstations from home, including TV weather forecasters, connecting to their weather computers, studio professionals for remote video editing and rendering, game developers, designers, architects working with 3D models. Definitely check out Splashtop. I've been using it for 7 years personally, and as an enterprise, we've been using it for 3 years. It's an excellent product. You can get a discount and a free trial by going to ageekleader.com/splashtop. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Larry Hubatka. He is the general manager at Tiny Horse and also the author of a book that I just adored called You Little Jerk. And I really liked a lot about it because it talked about culture, not just at work, but also at home. And it has some amazing illustrations. So I definitely want to talk about that as we get in here. But Larry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
So if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of what your journey's been like and some of the jobs you've had and kind of where that's led you today so we can have some context for our conversation.
Well, do you want me to tell you about the recent journey, like in the last month? Because I've gone nowhere. I've been in my house for 1 month.
Yeah, that's what happens at COVID-19, right?
That's right.
I definitely want to talk about that transition from going places to not going places.
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of backstory. I'll keep it brief. I'm 43 years old as of this recording today. And I started in TV years ago. My wife and I are from the Pacific Northwest. So I started working for an organization, agency that produced content for TV. We did Saturday morning cartoons on CBS years ago. And that brought me to Charlotte in 2005 and came out to work for a TV network. There were a couple other smaller stops in between. Sounds like I was all TV all the time, but I wasn't. But it happened to be a TV network that brought me out here. And then I spent about 10 years working for a church, which that's a whole nother story of its own. And about 3 years ago, I jumped back in with into the general market and started doing agency work again. And currently I'm the GM at Tiny Horse Marketing Agency. And then You Little Jerk, the book, was a passion project that I had been researching for quite a while. I just am a big fan of culture and not so much what we do, but the way that we do things. And the book was a byproduct of that. So probably more than what I meant to tell you, but that's the story.
That's fine. Yeah. So when it comes to working for TV, because I actually manage the technology department for a TV channel, as I call it.
Okay.
What do you think makes TV different than anything else? Or is there anything that makes it different? Is it just all the same?
Well, at the end of the day, I think it's content, right? You're trying to figure out how to deliver a story. And ideally something that's engaging, that connects with people in a format or a fashion that is memorable. And the more we get into even agency work or writing books or delivering content on TV, or a lot of times, the work that we do as an agency right now is we're producing and trying to sell in TV shows to networks or streaming platforms. Mm-hmm. It all really is the same. I mean, everyone's asking the same type of thing. When you deliver this content or distribute this wherever you're choosing to distribute it, on the receiving end, there's an audience, and the audience is asking some version of, so what's in it for me? And if you can actually help them come up with an answer to that, whether or not you're having to explicitly tell them or they can get to it on their own pretty quickly, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of being able to be successful.
Yeah, it's kind of like Gary Vee says, we're all media companies now, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, when I talk to different people, some people say, well, what is working in technology for a media company different than? I said, well, it's not. It's the same, really. I mean, you're all producing some kind of content, whether it's your blog, whether it's your marketing material, whether it's a commercial or video or something, and you've got to share it somewhere.
Exactly. So. And in fact, the world is so much flatter now than it's ever been. I mean, there's that book, who put that out? Thomas Friedman, I think is his name, maybe like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, called The World is Flat, where he talked about how basically technology or computers, home computers, were like the great equalizer. There have been multiple cycles in history, and this was the next cycle that we were on, where it was the Great Equalizer. And I thought it's so true, because I can produce content at home, I'm sitting in my home office right now. I can get a laptop, a microphone, and an internet connection, and produce content that can be distributed around the world. So, I mean, good content's good content.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that everywhere. We're seeing news reports, and our weatherman was just like at his house, doing the
That's
weather from his
right.
house with the TV in the background, So with this, I think people are starting to realize what's really there now that most of us are trapped in our house.
Yes.
I guess you would say.
Exactly.
And I wanted to get to you, talk to you a little bit about how that transition's been for you, not going anywhere to being stuck. Because I know for me, it's been a little challenging, a little difficult. Not just because of the work, working from home, because I've worked from home before. It's not a huge deal, but I think working from home with the kids at home and trying to teach from home, and all those things are kind of challenging. What about for you?
Well, I had to shift my mindset just a little bit. I'm home, I guess maybe going on 3 or 4 weeks now. I can't remember exactly. It's funny. It's just like blurring together. It's like day 26, day 31. I saw somebody post the other day. It's March 97. No, that's pretty funny. But I think I had to shift my mindset just a little bit from where I started, which was, oh, great, I'm going to be home. I'm going to be able to, it's not like I have more time, because frankly, I'm on the phone for probably, I don't know, I might be on the phone for 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, but you're on, video calls most of the time. Oftentimes this is conversation that might have happened in the office, or walking by somebody in the hallway, or, I travel pretty regularly. So I might be on the road meeting with a client, but now all that's just consolidated and aggregated into Zoom calls. So I'm on the phone a lot. And I thought I'm going to have a lot of time to just kind of tackle some stuff. And, I'm going to go get in shape, and I'm going to do all these different things. I think what I realized is, let me just make sure that, one, I stabilize. And instead of focusing on trying to take all this ground, it'd be a little bit like a business in a recession. Maybe think of it this way. In a recession, I think businesses in their category don't necessarily need to focus on new business and winning and increasing revenue. They need to focus probably on increasing market share, which probably doesn't look great to the bottom line. But when things do come back online, and we get closer to normal, or we return back to kind of the way things used to be, well, you've got increased market share. So now you're poised to actually do fantastic in the next season. So I think we have to pace ourselves a little bit and say, what's realistic for where we're at right now? Everybody working from home, kids being home, in all likelihood not going back to school this school year. Great, what's good? Well, I think connecting with the family, really good. I think getting some good time together is great. Having some strong conversations, great. Maybe some planning is great. But I think, reinventing my family or transforming my business may not necessarily be accurate.
Yeah. I think sometimes you have these ambitions of things you want to do, and sometimes it's just getting through the day. My wife and I were talking about it. There's going to be couples that probably get divorces because they're not used to this and they don't know how to handle it. And there's going to be other couples,
unfortunately,
that really their marriage gets so much stronger. And we've made a commitment to make sure that ours is going to be one of those that gets stronger because of this. And
that's awesome.
So every day, let's talk about the things we're grateful for. I used to say I'd never have enough time with the kids. Well, now I've got all the time in the world with the kids. So let's be grateful for that time.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about why culture is important to you, and what are some things that, as let's say a manager of a small team or a leader of a small team, I don't run the whole company, but I've got my own team. How can I apply some of the principles of having a good culture to your team? Because they always say that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And I think part of that's because of culture.
Yes, I agree with that for the most part, that I think people generally end up leaving people versus jobs. Well, I will say this. I get asked quite a bit. Part of it's my position at the agency that I run. Part of it is my wife and I have done a lot of, this feels a little bit out of nowhere, but we've done a lot of counseling, pre-marriage counseling, leading small groups. So we've had a lot of exposure to folks. One of the things that I get asked, ironically, more than anything else, is how do I know what I'm passionate about? And I thought, oh, what a weird question. And so, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I started thinking through ways to help people figure this out. In this process, part of it is helping people pay attention to the indicators that they have in their life. Meaning, what are the things that stir stuff in you, stirs something in you, the things that, get you fired up, the things that make you really happy, the things that prompt a lot of joy. You can start to pay attention to these themes or these topics that really stir something in you. Well, culture has always been something that's done that for me. However, I didn't always have a handle for it. So, again, I'm 43, so I've been working or in the workforce for, let's just say, 20 years. Well, 20 years ago would have been around 2000. I don't think people were like real buzzy around culture. Like, oh yeah, we got to talk about culture. This is, at least in my opinion, been a fairly recent last 1 to 2 decades phenomenon that Silicon Valley has really helped perpetuate, because they're doing it in a way that's very public and really exciting. But for me, I got into culture because I started realizing, I like doing work, I like winning, I like accomplishing things, and performance is a big deal. But I also really appreciate how we go about doing those things. So what we do and how we do it. So I think as a manager, if you're focused on how you do something, I think you're amplifying the impact of what it is that you are doing.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think for me, I never really heard about culture or thought much about culture until I think you hear some banging in the background. Maybe they're doing some work at my floor.
Can't even hear it.
Oh, well, it's just me. But it was when I read Netflix had posted their culture guide, and they listed some things that are important to them, and how you do your job at Netflix and how you need to think about things at Netflix. And when I read through that, I don't know if it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I was managing a web and mobile development team, and I thought, I've got to start using some of this stuff. And I got to come up with my own. I've got to come up with what my cultural norms are for my team and document them and write them down and memorize them and share them and actually live by them. And that's the first time that I ever thought, culture, I didn't even know what culture was. And maybe for
I don't think most people do.
Yeah. So I was going to say, for people that are in that same boat as where I was, a few years ago, how would you define culture? And what would you say culture is?
So for most people, the assumption is culture is associated with, let's say, fun or excitement. So in the workplace specifically, people might associate this with my company provides lunch for us, or we have a ping pong table in the break room. And I don't disagree. That is a part of culture, but I think I would broaden the scope a little bit. I wouldn't say culture is about being fun. For example, let's use Disney as a case study here. If you think about Disney and let's say the culture of Disney, I think you generally think, some version of Happiest Place on Earth, maybe Disney movies, maybe the parks. I mean, you've got all these like very highly positive things that come to mind. If you really dive into Disney and you really start to explore the culture, you'll discover that the culture is that, but it's also the intensity inside at the corporate level or of the operation and how it's run. Meaning their, let's say, commitment to hitting deadlines or their extreme accountability is also a part of their culture. So I would summarize culture as just saying, let's describe it as a way of life. Now, the way of life that you've established, because we've all got a culture that we're a part of, may not be one that you like, one that you agree with, or one that you ever tried to create intentionally. But regardless, it is a way of life. So for many people let's say in a leadership role or a management role, I think if they want to start by saying, okay, well, what's our culture? I would encourage somebody to review what it is the people who are in the culture do think of it as a reflex. They do as an automatic response to a conversation. So if John, as a leader, goes and talks to his team, let's say you've got 20 people that you're talking to, and you said, hey team, I've got a project I'm working on. Would anybody like to help me? And no hands go up right away. Well, maybe that's a one-off because, it's a Monday morning at 7:30 and you had them come in early and they're just tired. But if you see that happen once and you see it consistently, as a trend over time, you might start to discover, got it. So part of our culture is we don't really have a high level of proactivity, and it might be a high level of proactivity when the project is unknown, when John asks, when certain people are in the room, but you're trying to say, what's the reflex that we can observe that's an indicator of the actual culture we live in? Because hopefully you start to see things like there's a piece of trash on the ground. When somebody walks by, they pick it up. And you discover that the culture has a little bit of a sense of ownership. People feel pride about where they work. They want to keep it presentable and looking clean, or people are really affirming, or people talk behind people's backs and they don't confront. I mean, it could be any of these things. And then you take that principle over into the home and you discover, wow, we've got a lot of cultural standards in our home that we didn't even realize. Meaning we're okay having phones at the dinner table, or we're okay not speaking kindly or in an uplifting manner. We're okay with like cynicism and sarcasm. And I'm not saying any of this stuff is good or bad. I'm just simply saying, let's acknowledge what it is, and then we can decide what we want to do about it.
Right. So you got to define it first,
Correct.
kind of identify what's there, figure it out, define it. And I always like to go back to, family. I have a family that we have a culture of tough love, as we call it, to where, we're going to be sometimes brutally honest about the things that we see in an effort to, improve upon those things. But we're not going to ignore them. We're not necessarily going to sugarcoat them. If you're getting a little weight, a little pudgy around the belly, my wife's going to say, "Hey, look at that big belly," and poke at it. So that means I need to get on the Peloton and go for a run, right?
That's right.
So we're going to have that culture of tough love. That's kind of one of those things that we identified. And I noticed now that there's been this, lockdown and we're stuck at home, that I'm seeing certain things in my kids that I didn't realize before, and some certain things about how they're treating, education and learning, because, they've always done that at school and now they're doing it at home. And I get to kind of see their work ethic and some of their things and say, hey, am I setting forth the right culture for our family?
That's right.
And once I've identified some of those things, what are some things that I can do to maybe modify that or change that as the leader?
Sure. So the framework that I believe in, or that I subscribe to when it comes to how you actually create culture, because this is in my opinion, a misconception. I think people assume that culture is amorphous and it's elusive and it just happens, which, sometimes it does. I would say we're always creating culture. So let's create one intentionally, right? Let's create something that we like. I think when people hear that, they say, yeah, it sounds great. And it's a nice quote for a book, or maybe I'll post it on social, but how do I do that? So I would say kind of a 3-layered approach to this: create consistent experiences. So that's phase 1, that reinforce behaviors, beliefs, and values. That's phase 2, and tie those to emotion, which would be phase 3. And each of these have a very specific intent. So consistent experiences is pretty straightforward, right? You want consistency as opposed to one-off moments, meaning if you, John, as a dad in your home say, I'd really like for us to be, on-time people. And I don't know if you are or you're not, but I want, mom and dad, and I want the kids to be on-time people. Great. If you're going to do that, I think telling everybody once or making everybody, set an alarm one time is probably not going to get that done. But consistency, I think everybody would agree, that's probably going to help. So we're creating consistent experiences. The level or the degree of those experiences can vary, but that'd be phase 1. Phase 2 is identifying behaviors, beliefs, and values that are important to you that you'd like to see expressed in your culture. So I would tell anybody, from a parent to a manager in the workplace, to say, what is it that you're shooting at? So if you don't have an idea of what you like, I would say go study either the families, the businesses, the brands that you like, that you admire, and say, what is it about those cultures that I feel like is really compelling? For me, I have about 10 different individuals who represent either companies or the work that they do themselves in my book. And I said, these are the 10, it's actually 11 people who inspire me. One of them is Pete Carroll from the Seattle Seahawks. I'm a huge Seattle Seahawks fan. I love the way he runs his team. He says, I want everybody who's an assistant coach for me that wants to be a head coach to become a head coach at some point. I know that's going to become incredibly inconvenient for me, but if they want to do that, I want to support them. Well, that expresses itself in your culture differently. So now all of a sudden you've got a belief or a value that says people can go pursue what it is they feel designed or passionate about pursuing. And your leader, Pete Carroll in this instance, is going to support them. Well, that's an awesome value. So if that's a value you want to have, great. So if you identify that, then you can start creating experiences, even little micro experiences that start to seed that belief or that value in the culture. And then the phase 3, when I talk about connecting to emotion, well, that's a little bit more science. If you go read any study, there's a great one that Harvard did back in the 70s called the flashbulb memories. And it talks about our ability to recall moments that are tied to emotion. So for example, the example they use in the study is, where were you when you heard the news of JFK's assassination? For me, at my age, I might say, where were you when you heard of the news of 9/11, the events of 9/11? I mean, I can tell you exactly. I was sitting in my house in Portland, Oregon with my wife. We had just had a newborn a week earlier. A friend showed up at the door. Her name is Ashley, and she knocked on the door and said, hey, did you hear the news? I mean, I can recall it vividly. So the point here is, can you tie emotion to experiences and moments to help lock them in, meaning to make them memorable? I used 2 examples that were, kind of dire. Obviously, you don't have to do that. I think joy, I think affirmation are equally as powerful. So if we're talking about, let's just say one of these examples with your family of wanting to be on time. Well, you say you tell the family regularly. So consistently might not be every day, every hour. It might be once a week. Hey kids, I want us to focus on being on time. And when we're taking off, I'd love for us to, I'm making this like so dramatic, like we actually do this, but I want us to be on time so we can, get where we're going on time. I think it's respectful. And that would be something that we value as a family. Well, the first time everybody, let's say, gets in the car on time and you're going somewhere, for you to take 5 seconds and say, what's one of your kids' names?
Elliot.
Elliot. For you to say, Elliot, thank you for being on time. And I'm so proud of you. That was awesome. That took 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you the value of connecting it to that little emotional moment where Elliot, even though it was small, felt that little bit of affirmation really goes a long way when you start to accumulate these moments. If you pay attention, you'll start to see the culture shift over time because let's just say it's 2 months later. All of a sudden, Elliot's the first one in the car. And you're like, what the heck just happened? And you realize, okay, things are starting to shift and we're becoming a little more intentional about the things that we're reinforcing. So I don't think this is rocket science. I do want to encourage people that in the workplace or at home, you do have way more control over the culture you create, given some time and some structure that you put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just a testament to that. I know when at my company, I've created what I call our IT code. And those are like the things that we're going to do as a team. We're always going to, one of them is we're intentional about our work. One of them is we make life easier for those around us. And, every quarter we go through these and I ask the team if there's anything that they can add to this, that they want us to be that we're not, so we can talk about it. Is there anything that we say we are, but we're not actually doing? We're not living up to it. Should we take that off and just not do it? Is it, or do we need to change our behavior to kind of modify what we say we are?
That's great, John.
So we can be that. And one thing I've noticed is that over time, people I really noticed it because of this COVID-19 thing, right?
Yes.
So we had this company with, let's say, 300 employees that we almost never work from home. And all of a sudden, the rug gets pulled out from under us. We're not allowed to go to work. And we have to mobilize, all of our employees to be remote employees. How do we do that? Well, my team didn't even come asking questions on how we do this. They came with solutions. They came with figuring things out. And it's almost like, wow, I was moving. We bought a new house. We moved the Friday that everything was happening. And I wasn't there to lead the team, but yet they did it on their own. And it was kind of one of those things where I said, okay, this is paying off, right? The things that we put in place, for the last 3 years and have been trying to do and trying to set forth, now we're seeing people actually take steps and do this on their own without me being there, without, hand holding, and they're just living the culture that we've set, and they're doing it, like you said, by reaction. It's a reflex.
That's right. It becomes intuitive for them. It becomes almost automatic. And here's what's interesting. I love that you just mentioned like these values that you put together for the IT team. So let's say you zoom out of that and you talk about a mission statement or values or like a vision statement that organizations often put in place. I think they're awesome, but generally most of the time they're relatively useless because they look good or they sound good or it's like nice optics. But what are you doing to create the consistency component of that? Meaning if let's say one of your values is we're doing excellent work, right? I'm kind of making something up. Well, great. If that's a value, it looks awesome. And if you're in an interview, you can say, one of our values is we're gonna produce the highest quality work. Well, if nobody is actually putting consistent, regular behavior in place to help reinforce that, then how good is that value? Meaning if you're going to let bad work or bad quality work slide without some level of accountability or acknowledging it or addressing it, and I'm not saying you have to go over the top all the time. I'm saying you just have to live consistently to say, if this is a value of ours, it's a value of ours all the time, not just when we're in review time and we're looking at whether our values are good, or not just when the annual report comes out, or not just when we're hiring, but this is a value of ours that we live by because it's a way of life. That's what makes it culture.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I was just thinking about back through, our code, and the first thing on our list is act like an owner, act like you own the company, take ownership in everything you do. And when all this went down and people had to figure out how to do certain things, they all acted like it was their mission to do that and their job to do that. They didn't have to wait to be told to do it or say, oh, well, that's someone else's job. They just said, hey, let's all jump in and do it. And I remember our help desk ticketing group, we have a small team of 3 and a manager. So 4 that kind of run the help desk. And in one day they got more tickets than they typically get in a week because people didn't know how to work from home and they were trying to figure it out.
Right.
And without me even having to tell the rest of the team, the network team jumped in, the applications team jumped in, the network security guy got involved, and they're all working together to solve these tickets without anybody assigning them to them, without anybody telling them this is what you have to do. And it was all because they acted like they owned the company and they were going to make it happen.
That's great. I love that. I mean, it sounds like you built an incredible team there.
I inherited most of them, so I have to give credit to the guy before me.
Well, I'm just telling you, when you can be in an environment where your team culture starts to grab, and on top of that, it's a culture that you intentionally were hoping to build, the weight that it takes off of not just the leader, but of everybody, because you start to lean on people differently. You start to trust people differently because you feel like, I actually know how we're going to respond to this. I don't have to worry about checking up on somebody because I know it's actually going to get done. And I don't know if you know people like this. I certainly do. I think most of us do, where the friends that when you ask them for help, you have to check back up on them. They said yes, but you got to check back up on them to make sure it's actually going to get done. And the friends that when you ask for help and they say yes, you're like, I don't have to think about this again. Well, that's awesome. That's part of what culture does, right? It gives us something stable that we can lean on to feel like, I know what this is, I know what this isn't. And of course, you've got one already in place. It just may not be exactly what you want. So starting with acknowledging what it is and then building from there, meaning filling that gap between where you are today and where you want to go is doable. It's possible, but we have control over that. I just think people need to feel encouraged and empowered to say, take control of it and go build that. So
how much of culture in your mind is discipline?
I certainly think it's a huge factor. And mostly the discipline comes in the consistency, right? Yes. So take diet, take working out, take any of these things that require us to be consistent. Well, I don't know anybody. Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain. I don't know anybody who works out regularly. Let's just say they work out 3 days a week or more. That'd be regularly enough. Mm-hmm. Who does that? And they've done it for an extended period of time for, I don't know, been doing it for over a year. Who's not also a pretty disciplined person. I mean, certainly they've got some areas of their life that aren't disciplined, but yes, a big part of this is discipline. And if you're not disciplined, you've got to have somebody in the mix who is disciplined. So I don't want to discourage people that, hey, if you're not disciplined, well, you can't build culture. I would say, no, that's not true. But somebody who's disciplined needs to be involved in this mix. And so that means you might need to release and empower somebody or hand the reins off to somebody else and say, I might be the leader, but I know who the culture maker is on this team, and I'm going to hand the reins to you, let you run with that piece, but know that we're going to be working on where we're going together, but you really are going to orchestrate this. There's nothing wrong with that. You
set the strategy and let someone else kind of execute.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I know for me, I've never liked the word discipline because it reminded me of when I was a child and I got disciplined.
Right.
So I like the word consistency that you use much better. But I've always thought the same thing. Like you have to set those habits. And I'm trying to remember who it was. It may have been Craig Rochelle when he was at church. I'm talking about keystone habits. You have to have that one habit that kind of triggers the rest of your habits that are going to move forward. And I've tried to apply that to my team and said, what is the one thing that if we do it consistently, it'll make us do other things well as well.
Yes. There's a fantastic book that came out. I think it came out last year called Atomic Habits. That was real popular for a little
James
bit.
Clear or?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. I don't read up on every book that comes out about habits, but I did happen to read Power of Habit and Atomic Habits because they both seem to be, I generally gravitate towards things that seem to be popular or high performing. I'm kind of curious, right? why is this so good? Why do so many people like it? Well, Atomic Habits talks a ton about that. Talks about the power of starting small and figuring out how to accumulate this impact or identifying these triggers and then building them in with a little more intentionality. I think culture happens very similarly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree too. I think, like you said, once you define the culture of what you have now and set the vision of where you want it to go and how you want it to be known, like I always think like my culture is how we're going to be known. What are we going to be known as a team? And is it going to be like Facebook where we sit in beanbags and, we have fun, or like the company right up the street where they have like a bowling alley in their, in their basement and they all go play, right. Or what is your culture going to be? How are you going to be known for? I want to be known for, helping people out, making life easier for those around them, and doing the right thing, whether we're asked or not.
That's right. I hope people feel encouraged when they hear a conversation around culture, that it's actually a lot more accessible than they realize. I think sometimes it feels a little nebulous and say like, oh yeah, cool culture. And then you start thinking of people who have a great one. You realize, that's cool for them, but I could never create that. And I guess I'm trying to help people understand, no, I actually think you could. It's probably going to start a little smaller. And, when I wrote this book, I called it You Little Jerk for a reason, because I said that jerk concept, or like a knee jerk or a reflex, is the indicator. So I think what's interesting and hopefully encouraging for people is, as they start to implement some of these steps, to say, I'd really like to be a little more collaborative. I'd like to be more communicative, whatever it is, whatever value you put in place or whatever behavior it is that you put in place. When you start to implement it, reinforce it, you eventually start to see these little small reflexes. So let's just say it's about communication. Well, that'll begin to express itself when you, as the leader, don't have to prompt somebody on your team for an update, and they just drop an email to you real quick, or a Slack real quick, and says, hey, John, I want to give you a quick update. I was thinking about this. I know we have a meeting next week about it, but wanted to pass it along while I was thinking about it. Well, that might be the knee-jerk reaction, the little reflex reaction where you start thinking, okay, I think this is starting to catch. And, for me, I have fun with the whole theme, because now I start calling people who actually create culture, I start calling them jerks. And so, like, in this instance, I'd be like, John is a jerk because he is doing incredible at creating culture.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I do want to let people know that you don't have to have a lot of money to change your culture or create a culture. You can do it for free, pretty much. We've done little things to try to make things fun, such as I brought in the Nintendo Classic and Super Nintendo Classic and the Atari, and set up little screens. We play little games and have fun. Yeah, and that's part of our culture, but that's a small part. The big part are the Monday morning meetings where we get together and we talk about, our weekend. We talk about what went on. And then the quarterly meetings where we talk about our culture. We talk about what are our IT code, what are the things that we're going to do, what are our cultural norms. And we all, agree upon that we're going to keep this or we're going to change something.
Yes.
And what we're going to do to move forward as a team. And, one of the things in our team is that, we have each other's back. And in IT, we're a small group, but if anything goes wrong in IT, it's IT's fault. It's not John's fault.
Right.
It's not
That's right.
someone else.
That's awesome.
It's all of our fault. And we have all got to be there to pick it up, because people don't distinguish the network engineer from the help desk person. We're all the front face of IT because we're in technology.
That's right. I also think it would be good I like your example, because I think if somebody's in that environment where you have a little bit more of a Three Musketeers, all for one for all mindset, we're like, hey, we're in this together. Well, I would also say in this together does not mean 100% uniformity. I can't think of 100% uniformity across anything I do anywhere in my life. However, you're talking about general way of life, right? If you call somebody who works at a customer service company, well, when they pick up the phone and they say, hey, this is John. Thanks for calling. How can I help you? Well, I hope that, 90% of the people or 95% of the people who pick up the phone answer it that way. If 5% don't, it doesn't mean that we're not a customer-oriented organization. It just means that we're never going to be perfect. I don't think that's what we're striving for. We're saying, generally speaking, is this the way that we're doing life? Is this the way that we're trying to orchestrate the way that we work? Is this the language that we want to be using? Is this the style, the approach we want to take? Yes. Okay, great. Now we'll slowly start to assimilate this into the culture more and more and more across the different people, but it doesn't have to be everybody all the time. That's like, that'll be exasperating trying to patrol that.
Right. Because sometimes you go to Chick-fil-A and they don't say, my pleasure.
That's right. And I take my money back immediately.
but every now and then, you realize that sometimes, people are going to fail. We're all human. And,
that's right.
And I like to go back to conflict. Just because you have a culture and you're going to do things one way, you also have to have healthy conflict. And if you don't have that conflict every now and then, you're not going to, make innovations. You're not going to advance. You're not going to change and grow and improve as a team. So conflict is pretty important.
I totally agree. I think that sometimes people shy away from it because it scares them. And it sounds like in your family, you were describing a tough love approach. Mm-hmm. What probably makes more sense that conflict's more common for you. I think for people where conflict isn't common, well, yeah, I get that there's a higher level of discomfort. So I would say culturally, try to figure out how to help your people embrace conflict in a way that actually works for your team. So if you have a bunch of folks who are non-confrontational or just kind of shy away from it or kind of run from it, well, figure out if the next best step would be getting people to express themselves through and I don't actually like an anonymous suggestion box, but maybe you've got to implement that as a stepping stone to say, we at least need to get what's inside people out of them. How could we do that? We could probably come up with 20 different ways to do that. And through doing that, we could find one or two that are probably good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for me, it was one-on-ones. And at first when I implemented one-on-ones, no one wanted to complain. They never wanted to say anything negative. So then I made them walking one-on-ones where we would go outside and we would walk around the pond at our business and just talk about, whatever. And when I got out of my office and we're outside, it was almost more like we were on equal footing, and they were more likely and more willing to open up and complain and say the things that needed to be said and share the conflict. And then after they got comfortable sharing it with me, then it became something that we could say during our meetings with the whole team.
Yes, that's right. I mean, again, it's a process. I think if anybody's expecting change to come quickly, it's probably not going to be lasting. For the most part, real change takes time.
Yeah,
well, that's
absolutely.
okay. As long as that's the expectation, I think we're okay.
Yeah. And when you go back to, you mentioned discomfort, anything that I've ever done that has been very successful had its discomfort, whether it's exercising or running. I like to run. And, still today, the first mile that I run is always the hardest. It's always like putting the shoes on and getting, the first couple of steps is always the hardest because you have to start. But once you get going, then you get that, endorphins kick in, you start feeling good about yourself. You're confident that you did it. You're feeling excellent. And then you finish and you're like, I'm so glad I did that. I never run and say, I wish I didn't run today.
That's right. I totally agree. I mean, most of the time it's just like it's the hurdle of getting started that ends up holding most people back, but get started and you'll be surprised at how far you can go.
So one last question about this. What is the tip for getting started?
When it comes to creating culture, I think if you don't have a destination in mind, it becomes really challenging to ever arrive. So even if that destination isn't fully built out and totally robust, let's just say you're at home and you say, you know what I'd like for us to just talk more as a family. Well, even that to me feels like it's a destination that you can shoot for. Or somebody might say, if they're a leader of a team, you've got 10 people working for you in the workplace, you might say, I want us to be more unified in how we approach decision making. Meaning if we make a decision, not everybody agrees, we're going to support each other because we're going to stand together. I would say pick a direction or pick a behavior, belief, or value that you'd like to start implementing and begin there. Because most of the time we say things like, I just want to have a better culture. Well, as somebody who spent years in design, I would go to a client and the client would give me feedback on, let's say it was a logo that we created for them. Well, the feedback wouldn't be, I really like the design. It looks a little masculine. I was thinking of something that felt more universal and the colors seem a little dark. It wasn't that, because I can work with that. It was usually something like, you know what? I don't know. I can't tell exactly. I think, could you just make it more awesome? And you realize, oh, no, I don't think I can do that. Because your awesome versus my awesome, is not going to work. It's just not the same. So I think having that context for where you're headed is probably the best first step you can take. And then, of course, I would say the general framework is know where you are, know where you want to go, recognize that gap and what you need to do to close it. And then from there, you can start chipping away.
Awesome. Well, Larry, this has been a great conversation. How can people find out more about you and maybe connect with you and check out your book?
Sure. They can always catch up with me on social media. I'm just Larry Hubatka, pretty much everywhere. Or if they want to find out more about the book or the workshops or the different online courses that we offer around culture, they can just go visit youlittle.jerk.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate having you on.
Thanks, John.
All right. Stay safe out there. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Larry Hubatka. And if so, please head on over and pick up You Little Jerk. You can get that at Amazon. And also I want to thank our sponsor, Splashtop. Don't forget, you can get a discount plus a free trial by going to ageekleader.com/splashtop. Again, that's ageekleader.com/splashtop for the best product that I've used for remote management of a PC or server, desktop. You can use your iPad or whatever. Great tool, great product. Definitely check that out. Again, ageekleader.com/splashtop. And thank you guys for listening to the show. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all you guys do. Stay safe out there.